Welcome back to Open to Truth, a podcast all about exploring big ideas and discovering truth together. My name's Clint.
Hi, I'm Tony. Welcome back.
And today we are going to talk a bit about jeans.
Jeans.
Not these.
Not these.
Not the article of clothing.
No.
What I am composed of.
That would be a pretty short conversation. I don't have that much to say. I buy them without holes. I wear them till they get holes.
I could say a little bit more about the jean industry, but it would be far afield for what we have for today.
That's not what we're talking about today, though.
Maybe a future one. So if anyone missed the memo from the 1950s and Francis Crick and Watson,
yeah,
you are composed of DNA. On this DNA is your genes, your genetic code.
Genetic code, like instructions. Is that right? For how my cells should replicate, what jobs they should do, and all that.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, and we can go, obviously it's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And we don't have the time or the skill.
No, I don't have the skill
to parse that out.
That's about as far as I go.
Yeah. But pretty quickly it gets not only complicated biologically, scientifically, but what are the implications of this in terms of behavior, even how I think, or my personality.
Yep.
We might wonder, to what extent is everything around us the result in some way to a little inscription on these deoxyribonucleic acids, DNA. And there's these different letters human beings have assigned to these different collection of chemicals that are that double helix that you've seen. And that's inside each of your cells, your entire genetic code, the instructions for building out this thing.
Like a blueprint.
Yep. It gives the information for what amino acids to put together in a certain way to form a protein. And proteins are how you form other building blocks of cells. And so I'm made up of proteins and cells. Yep. Here I am. So that's the basic science. Like I said, it gets way more complicated.
Yeah.
But here's kind of like the philosophy tie-in here. And it's also becoming less and less science fiction in that we are learning more and more about what portion of that genetic code maps on to which proteins. And what collections of proteins or lack thereof lead to certain disorders, lead to certain traits, both some that don't get manifest and some that do. And the interesting ethical question is, what do we do with this knowledge?
Because I don't know if we're at the point, or we're at least reaching the point where manipulating DNA is becoming a possibility, or will. It's at least worth thinking about. I feel like I read somewhere, and who knows, the internet, that you can... Well, can you choose your baby's eye color already? Can you do that?
I don't know.
You don't
I
know?
am not up to date on the cutting edge of what traits are malleable in that way.
But we can certainly imagine a world where the science exists for you to be able to determine...
And before we need to gear up before we do too much imagining.
Okay.
Let's head over to the lab.
Are we going to the lab today?
Yeah, for a thought experiment.
Great. See you
Just
there.
when we're imagining, I like to make sure we're all prepared.
In the lab. Okay, all right, let's head there. Great. Do you have a thought experiment for us then?
I don't have you
came to the lab with no experiment prepared?
Well, you wanted to imagine. So you're thought experimenting about the future.
I am. Okay. Yes. I'm imagining a world where where maybe you are pregnant and before your child is born, or maybe you do it in vitro or whatever, but you can select certain traits for this child. Like, I would like my baby to have blue eyes and blonde hair. And you can even take it further than that. Imagine I want them to grow to be this tall.
Imagine your favorite restaurant, just real quick, in your mind, and how, particularly maybe with the pandemic in 2020, all of these websites for online ordering have just become really easy to use, user-friendly.
Yeah.
Imagine that same kind of... I'm thinking of Chipotle and how clean and crisp they have pictures of stuff, and I just click little buttons. Imagine you could do that with having a child. Is what you're intimating.
Design
hair
your
color.
child.
would you like pinto or black beans? You know,
Right.
I can go down and maybe even in a like an Adobe art thing, there's that color wheel.
Yeah.
You could even drag the little
The
thing
exact place on the spectrum. Yeah.
Number 2, 5,
Purple
1.
eyes or whatever. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so I'm not saying by any means that we can do that now. I don't see a reason why it couldn't be that case later on.
Right.
But just for the sake of argument, I almost want to, maybe it's not the right place in the conversation to do this, but we will.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine that we can basically do that for any observable trait. I want to build that into the thought experiment.
Right. Okay.
Not only eye color, you could do hair color.
So let's take this as far as it can go.
Skin color,
Yep.
height, the disposition of what your weight might be, this
Voice
range.
timbre.
Yep.
Yep.
Everything can get a little sliding scale on this imagined Chipotle child
Can I
chart.
ask, do you know, and maybe this is offensive to ask, I don't think it should be,
Okay.
but things like intellectual capacity, are those determined by DNA? So like, could you have a child that is smarter or more, I don't know, better at reading, or they're able to learn faster?
Okay.
Is that stuff determined by DNA?
Great. Well, so you use the word determined,
I did.
and I'm going to say no to that.
All right.
What the term we want to use here is heritability.
Heritability, right.
Okay.
That's what I heard.
So
old mate talk about.
a certain trait is heritable, and in fact, some would argue that all traits have a degree of heritability. And crucially, just to avoid any accusations or anything, what we're talking about is what there are differences in outcome and manifest behaviors or
Yes.
traits, different trait differences. To what degree are those differences responsible for differences in the genetic makeup? That's what we're wondering with a heritability percentage.
Okay.
Okay, so for something like Huntington's disease,
Mm-hmm.
where we can point right now to the allele on the DNA, on the chromosome, I think it's on the 4th one, if I'm not mistaken, and we can find that little portion, and if you have the wrong few letters, you will have Huntington's, and you will die from that.
We know that.
And so that is 100% guaranteed by your genetics.
Right.
As a 100% heritability.
Okay.
Similar to your eyes, your eye color is 100% hereditary, or you inherited that from your genetic makeup of your mother and father. Now, so those are like, how do I put it? It's like localized very specifically to one part of your genetic code.
Yeah.
Now, there are these other traits that are complex in nature. We might say those are simple traits. Then we have complex ones that are maybe composed of different things throughout your entire genetic code. And so little differences all over the place can lead to vastly different results.
Yeah, sure.
No one's saying, well, maybe someone is, maybe like a hardcore environmentalist, or like the nature-nurture distinction. Someone that would be really heavy on nurture might disagree with this.
Okay.
But basically everyone in the scientific community is genuflecting to the notion that genetics plays a large role in everything, or
Yeah.
at least a role.
Yeah.
So when you say, are things like intelligence determined by genetics? Well, they are certainly influenced, and a lot of scientific work is going toward finding out that heritability percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go, maybe, I just don't know the data on G, it's sometimes called, which is
Yeah.
a way of avoiding the word intelligence. That by that they mean general intelligence.
Right.
Because the word is so fraught with different political
Yeah.
problems. But what would you say, if just off the top of your head, if you had to guess, what would be the heritability percentage of weight? So, and by that we mean the variances you see in a population of different body weights. To what degree is that due to the genetic makeup of the individual?
I reckon it's at least 50%.
Okay. Yeah, so this guy, Robert Plomin, who I really recommend you pick up his book, Blueprint, How DNA Makes Us Who We Are. He recently came on the Sam Harris podcast and talked all about this. He gives this as an example of where our intuitions are off on this. Like the data just shows that it's about 80%
Wow.
of the differences that we see in populations on weight. 80% of those differences are, I could look to genetics to find out,
To predict that. Right.
Do your genetics determine your weight? No, because there is another 20% due to nurture or environmental impacts, or if we want to get into topics like free will or a soul, where I could have discipline and exercise more. Surely if you put me in a room with no food for 3 weeks, I will lose weight. And it's not really a matter of genetics. So all these different fringe cases or other influences do lead to some differences.
Yeah.
But the studies are showing it's like 80%.
Yeah.
Or school achievement is another one he talks about in his book, where now we're creeping maybe a little bit toward intelligence. You might want to say that students who achieve more in the school setting, it's owed to intelligence in some way, perhaps. But that's also showing like 60% of the differences is just genetics.
So I want to bring us back to then our thought experiment about if we were able to select various traits for our kids before they're born. I think the way we got on that was I was wondering whether intelligence was one of those things we could select for.
Yeah.
But I think an interesting question is, is there anything wrong with, let's start with this what seems like the most benign case of changing eye color or hair color or something. Is there something wrong with determining your child's hair color? On the surface, doesn't seem like it. But imagine that you could set your child up for the most success by giving them those more advantageous traits. I mean, I'm making this up, but imagine that there's a statistic that shows, I don't know, people with blue eyes are just more likely to do better in a job interview or something like. They're more likable. I don't know if that's true. Sorry if you don't have blue eyes.
No, just this is helpful. So maybe here just a little side rabbit trail just to point out that the value of traits are not always fixed across all culture and all time.
Yeah, of course. So
certain traits become more valuable in certain social circumstances.
Yes.
So imagine you're, pre printing press or even pre-literate cultures. It doesn't really help you to have the trait of like hyper focus, or that you would be able to like discern hieroglyphs very well. Like you're a hunter gatherer.
It's just not going to come up.
Yeah. Motor skills seem like a more valuable trait.
Yeah.
And so we could pontificate all day about what traits generate the most value in our culture, different cultures.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, suppose that you could tweak any such traits that happen to be valuable. And like, why wouldn't you, if you have the resources, go into the doctor's office and take that sliding scale and like, oh, can I just max this out? It's like creating a character in
Skyrim or something.
NBA Jam. I'm creating my basketball player. Like, oh, if I can make him 7'3",
I'll make him as tall as I can. Yeah.
How much do I want his dribbling skill to be? 50 or 100? Oh, So I mean, imagine doing that for these different traits.
Yep.
And I think we want to know, and it's been wondered about for a long time, are there any ethical concerns
there
that we would want to put on that as a society?
I can imagine, I don't know whose voice this is, but there's a voice that jumped into my head that said, that's playing God. You can't do that. That's playing God.
Do you mean, and can you say more?
I think the argument there is supposed to be something like that there's some things with which man should not tamper, and the kinds of decisions about who you are, or at least what kind of body you inhabit, all of that should be left up to the fates of the gods, or that they should be able to decide that, or nature, circumstance, however you want. That there's something sacred about how you are formed in your mother's womb, such that you shouldn't be making decisions about that for another person. I think that's at least a feeling some people have. So I don't know how strong of an argument there really is there.
Yeah. I think, I don't agree with that line of reasoning.
Yeah.
But I think what I would point to is what counts as a natural asset.
Right.
Or what counts as something to I think you said like that we would be changing something fundamental about us or who we are as people or something, and that only God has dominion over that. But I would just suggest that we do that all the time already for things that are not part of this discussion.
Yeah, can you give an example?
Yeah, so I mean, you can be born with certain deformities in a heart muscle, like a hole in the heart, and we want to do everything we can to repair that
fix
hole.
that, yeah.
So is that part of like your?
Is that playing God?
Is that playing? Yeah, is that playing God? Because you were formed in your mother's womb that way. That's how your body developed. But that's going to lead you to not have a successful life. Your life will end early if you have holes in your heart.
Yeah.
And so we would like to go in and fix that. That's not the way it ought to be.
Right.
Yeah. So when you frame it like that, there are different ways that we alter our bodies or fix problems in a way to set a person up for success later, or at least try to equal this playing field for opportunity so that they can live a life with a genuinely open future and certain things aren't closed off to them.
Yeah. So I guess the next concern would be the next voice that
Okay.
raised his voice in my head was if such a procedure was available, it probably wouldn't be cheap to be able to select your baby's, traits. And so it seems like those who already have advantage in some way, financial resources or whatnot, would then be able to set up their progeny for even greater success. And the wealth gap is going to widen and the rich get richer, and those who can't afford to get, baby modifications, those lines will die out or struggle, or you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying, and I just think it takes a bit of care to pose the problem.
Please clean up my mess.
No. I'm not saying I can do any better, but so one issue just right away with how you phrased that was, or not an issue with how you phrased it, but a criticism someone might have is, well, there already are advantages that wealthy children of wealthy parents have. So, I was fortunate enough to have a grandfather that left me an inheritance, and I was able to spend that achieving some higher education goals that may not have been as accessible, or I would just be saddled with even more debt, and it would take me a long time to claw out from under that.
Yeah.
And so I would not be at the financial level I am today if it were not for my grandfather. So I was set up for success. I had an advantage over someone that did not have that inheritance.
Yep.
Now we can wonder, different podcasts about estate tax and whether people should get inheritances at all, and wondering about that. But even so, maybe even that's a bad example. Maybe just not someone leaving me inheritance, but let's say my dad's a surgeon and just makes a lot of money, way more than the average income, right?
Yeah.
And can send me to the best private schools.
Yeah. That's an advantage.
And lo and behold, people that go to better private schools end up getting into better universities, and people that go to better universities end up getting better paying jobs. And the cycle, and now I become the rich father that can do the same thing for my kid, and this process continues.
Yeah.
So that's something that happens now. That's like the status quo. And I think what we would want to ask then, like to revise the question, is would this whole arena of genetic enhancement or genetic engineering increase this problem in such a way that those on the lower end of this spectrum or problem are totally left behind? Because
in a way that they are not now.
In a way that they're not now. And again, we might argue, I think some would, that the wealth gap is such...
It's already happened.
It's already happened that you can be born in such a circumstance that you can never achieve those certain levels of wealth. I don't happen to agree with that. I think we still live in a time where that's possible. The quote-unquote American dream is still alive and well in most places in America, I'd like to say. And I'm open to being wrong about that and having a discussion. Of course, always open to.
If not, it's time to hang up the headphones and go home. We're not doing the podcast anymore.
Definitely open to conversation.
If you ever reach that point.
Yeah. But I am very sympathetic to this idea that if we were to just let genetic enhancement run rampant, and particularly like realistically, if this were to actually happen, just like anything else, it would be very costly up front. Like a VR headset right now is so expensive. Very few people have them.
Yeah.
They're fun, and it's the cutting edge of gaming and
Oculus
media.
Quest 2. It's cheaper. It's going to be the first one that goes mainstream. Get yourself one. Anyway, continue.
Right. So there's these different or Tesla, different. Some things are pay gated at such a high rate that only the wealthy experience them first. But if that were the case here, and all of the wealthy people ended up doing this genetic enhancement, is this problem of such an ilk that there's no turning back from it? It would start this chain reaction where the wealthy, or maybe anyone above this threshold, maybe let's say 100, those who make over 120,000 a year, start producing superhumans, essentially, that basically never fail and achieve all the accolades. And it's making this issue for someone to be able to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and achieve, despite not having those advantages, even harder. I think that almost is obviously true, that it
would be harder. Yeah, I can imagine a race of superhumans that have, I don't know, think of all the crazy while we're imagining, think of all the crazy science fiction you could do. They're tall, they're fast, they're strong, they're smart, their skin is impenetrable. They can produce more and achieve more than anybody who doesn't have these modifications could possibly hope to do. They have the strength of 10 men or something, make it as crazy as you want.
There's this book I was just brushing up on before we were recording. I think it's called From Chance to Choice, the ethics and justice of genetics. And they give this example of, or a thought experiment. Imagine it's the year 2040 and Lisa goes up for a job interview against Joe. They're the last two candidates. And inside Lisa's portfolio is a little certificate. It says a genetic enhancement certificate. And it shows that she has been to a genetic enhancement lab and she has these traits. And people with these traits have been shown they don't get the cold, so they don't miss work at all. They have increased memory. They don't have memory loss as much. They have focus.
Attention. Yeah.
And Joe does not have his genetic enhancement certificate.
His mind is prone to wander.
He's like, that's not fair. I don't have. She's like, well, I worked hard and my parents worked hard. They paid for me to have this, and isn't this a meritocracy? Like I'm the best candidate. To the best candidate goes the job and the spoils. So it's really fascinating because it's pushing on our intuitions about what counts as my nature.
Yeah.
Right? And to your point about the playing God, there is something to that. I think the little nugget of truth there is that we do, I think right now, think of our genetics as something, how do I put it? Uniquely mine. For a long time, they have been immutable. And now all of a sudden, that is one of the dials that can be shifted. And that poses...
Can I ask, that little example you just gave of Joe and Lisa, does that make you uncomfortable to think about? Do you feel sorry for Joe when you tell that story?
Well, I don't necessarily want to be guided by my feeling.
I know. I'm not asking you to... I'm asking you to be human for a moment and not the cold, rational philosopher that I know you to be. How do you feel about that story? Do you feel sad for Joe?
Yeah.
I'm not. It's not a trap. I'm not trapping you, mate. This is us thinking out loud. I'm just trying to work out and why our intuitions feel that way. There's something that strikes me as being, boy, that's rough for Joe.
What do you mean? Like, was it unfair though?
I wanted to say unfair, and I changed it to rough.
Why did you in the instant?
Well, Lisa's argument. Just like, I don't think she did anything wrong. I don't think Lisa has done anything wrong.
And now, Tony, honestly, though, what the proponent of genetic engineering would say is, how is that genetic engineering certificate at all different from seeing Harvard University
education.
on the CV?
Yeah.
Or on your resume?
No,
it's an advantage that was purchased through privilege and finances. Again, I'm not saying people that go to Ivy League schools don't deserve them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an analogous case where, to Robert Plomin's point, school achievement, like it's not really even nurture that they were extremely hardworking or these are the most disciplined. Like their parents were probably also very smart and they inherited this and now they're going to the better schools.
So in that case, it's sort of like it's a little more like I don't know, like an accident of nature or bad weather or something. I feel bad for Joe in the same way I feel bad for people that have a tornado rip through their house. It's like that just kind of, that's rough the way that panned out for you. I don't know if it's unfair that it tore through your house and not somebody else's. I don't think it was personal in that way. But you've been dealt a rough hand, you know, compared to Lisa. So, but that, like to your point, that sort of disparity is already occurring all the time.
And sadly, these kind of questions, no one's really talking about this because, and like this is something that could happen in our lifetime. You could easily imagine the genetic enhancement certificate, and we should be thinking about this ahead of time. Do we want to make state, federal policies that, like discrimination laws, you can't hire, this is what the movie Gattaca was about. That people that weren't genetically engineered were discriminated against and had less access to different social goods and stuff. So we should be thinking about this. Sadly, so much of the rhetoric, not only on this, but a lot of things have been taken over, maybe I'm tipping my hand here, by wokeism and like extreme leftists where your personality or your character is assaulted for bringing up some of these things.
Differences,
But I think it's really important to think about these things ahead of time. Just to say that public policy and the time frame to make these decisions is usually always eclipses or is running ahead of the philosophy and the ethics of it. You mean we don't think about these things far enough in advance until they are upon us? They're upon us, and then we start thinking about it. Like we're living through it right now. There was not a cultural conversation in 17, 18, and 19 about allocation of resources and social behavior during pandemics. I'm sure there probably was some literature in a dusty corner of a philosophy department or a library that had some articles about it, but that's why, I mean, part of the hope for this podcast is to raise up some of these issues into audiences' general thinking, like keep this on the back burner, like be thinking about this a little bit, like how you as a voter would respond to some of these measures. And
well, I don't know what the alternative would be to ensure that sort of discrimination doesn't happen. You don't want to start discriminating against people who do have the genetic enhancements. That's just discrimination as well. I'm also thinking this seems a little more realistic or maybe near future, not just genetic modifications, but like the symbiosis of AI and biology. So you've heard about Elon Musk's Neuralink. If you have not heard of Elon Musk's Neuralink, go Google it. In fact, pause this and go Google Neuralink Joe Rogan. Listen to him and Joe Rogan. He has a 20-minute bit where he talks about Neuralink and kind of what his goals are for it. They did a whole keynote on it recently. Bottom line is, it's a little amazing. Quarter-sized, I don't know, chip thing. They cut out a circle in your skull and embed it, and there's little nodes or strands that will go down into your brain. And the idea is that it will be like having a smartphone in your brain, sort of. And I think the dream for it is there's obviously tons of medical applications to this. If your gray matter's not functioning properly such that you have Alzheimer's, you're struggling to retrieve memories, Neuralink promises to be able to fix that sort of thing. Or to bypass severed nerves and stuff in the central nervous system so you can regain control of limbs, that sort of thing. But you can also take it further than that. Imagine that you could stimulate the parts of your brain that you needed to play music, to feel like you're hearing music without your eardrums vibrating, you know? That you could have communication with other people that's entirely mental. I mean, take it as far as you want. It's very Black Mirror-esque, this whole thing. But why wouldn't I want to hire somebody that has a Neuralink in their brain, especially if it's like a problem-solving position and they have access to the world's databases and search engines all in their mind. They don't need to type it. They don't need to make typos and backspace and it's just instant. They want to know an answer to a question. Boom, yep, there it is. Got it. You know? So these, I think that faces the same challenges that genetic modifications do in terms of it providing an advantage. It's probably only going to be, I mean, it's going to be expensive to begin with. So those who have some degree of advantage will be the ones who have first access to this even greater advantage. And depending on how sort of exponential the changes are in how you operate, who knows how quickly you, after getting a Neuralink, say you get Neuralink 10 version 10, that's incredible in some way, and you have some AI in your head, your money-making potential just goes through the roof. Suddenly you are way smarter and you can figure out how to make even more cash. It could be such that the first to get there just take off in a way that the rest can't possibly catch up to.
I think that's the crucial point.
Yeah.
Because we can wonder, I mean, there are very legitimate discussions about public policy on how we could allocate resources. So you might say, I mean, there was a whole Obama phone program under Obama where you can get a free cell phone through the government.
I didn't know that.
So that's great. Well, I don't know if it's great, but in any case, that was a program. Like here's this tool that just seems so ubiquitous in our culture. Wouldn't it be just great if everyone had like easy access to that? You might say the same for Neuralink. You could wonder about the same thing for genetic engineering. Like everyone, that's just a paid for thing, and you could federally mandate that all health insurance companies have to offer X amount of alterations to new babies / fetuses. I don't know. There's a lot of creative policy making, and we can wonder about all of that. But I think the crucial question is, even in this, that's why having conversations ahead of time is super important, because there's this window where it's a new technology, and are there like severe, lasting, or even irreversible damage to a economy or a society where we allow this unrestricted for a certain amount of time and it just gets carried away?
And if anything,
like, so here's one example of that. Like the recent documentary on Netflix, I think it's the most watched documentary of all time now, The Social Dilemma.
oh yeah,
One prescription they make at the end of that film is, what if we put an attention tax on big tech? So they are taxed for the amount of time that you spend on their platform. And there's a certain exchange rate for how long someone spends and the money they're charging you, and that might change the business practices. Maybe it disincentivizes them to create a product that sucks more and more of your time.
Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but that was not a suggestion or built in at the beginning by a majority of voices. All of a sudden, you have a little guy in Harvard who makes the Facebook, and it started off as something else. I'm forgetting the name, the Harvard Connection or something.
Yeah.
And it just kind of like exploded and evolved in this thing without any regulation. And now
we're left scrambling.
The Social Dilemma outlines some problems about social media. Not saying to totally get rid of it like they are, but it brings up some problematic features that we're facing.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth thinking about before we invent these things.
Yeah.
Let's come up with some policy.
Yeah.
Another example, I think it's the UN, I want to say, or it might be a whole separate organization that is like spending a lot of time thinking about world policy for alien encounters.
Right.
How ought we make first contact? What should be our response to if we encounter something that's hostile?
Yeah.
And like thinking
Let's
ahead of
not
time.
wing it.
Instead of like the UFO is here and ready to blast us, and you're now
And now
only
we
now
start
calling
bickering.
Putin
Right.
and figuring out like, hey, can we work together? It's like we're putting things in place ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I mean, who knows what's going on behind the closed doors of the elites that rule us, and hopefully they're talking a little bit about this, but
They have to be talking about AI.
but I just back, I don't mean to be getting myself in trouble, but I just find myself frustrated at the conversations that do take the limelight of culture, and how I think misguided they are when there are these other important things to be thinking about.
Yeah.
So
You can say more, man. This is a free speech platform. We can
No, that's
say what
okay.
we want here.
no, that's all right. I mean, I'm mostly referring to, I guess, like the Black Lives Matter movement and burning of cities
Yeah.
and defunding cops. And I know that means reallocating resources, but even the messaging is strange to me. And just like how much of the cultural discussion is around these things when, like, here's a problem that could really exacerbate some of the things that you're genuinely worried about.
Yeah. And it's looming. I mean, it's. I don't really think it's an if. It's a when, right? At least in terms of AI, it's a when. It's an inevitability, and I think of the problems which have the potential for that sort of exponential runaway, AI is the big one, right? The whole idea of
Let me
singularity.
put it this way: the people that are spending time thinking a lot about racial injustice, I think, could be like, the focus has been on their systemic racism, and that's the main plight that people of color are facing in America. Whereas someone who's more conservative, like myself, might want to resist that description of what the problem is and say, like, oh, maybe there's some economic factors at stake, or how we're organizing society in that way that are leading to people not having as good of lives as others. And so if right now, as they are pointing out, the people that are, part of these camps and activists, that there are wealth discrepancies between ethnic groups, well, this is an even bigger problem when you consider that fact. So imagine a world where, let's say, I don't know what the actual numbers are here, but let's say on average, and I think there is something like this, where a white person in America has X amount of more dollars than a black person. Let's just say.
Sure.
And what if this access to genetic enhancement is cost prohibitive of such that mostly white people have access and black people don't?
Yeah.
And then you start getting white babies born,
White super
that
babies.
are perfect in a way, like have all these, dials tuned up.
Cranked up.
And other people don't have access to that. And now the very problem you were worried about
Has just gotten a lot worse.
has gotten a lot worse.
Yeah.
That, like, to me, that's a really interesting way to harness concerns about racial equity that bring and equality of opportunity in a way that focuses on the economic aspect of this and how that has negative or positive implications, rather than saying that the hearts and minds of non-black people are corrupt and racist in nature.
Right. Right.
So in any case,
So
that's lamenting how conversation is going in America and how there's these host of other topics. You brought up AI.
Yeah.
That's another one we should all be thinking really carefully about, and how it impacts all of our lives collectively.
Yeah. Can I ask, and maybe this is putting you on the spot, if it is, just say, but in terms of what might we do about this problem? We started with genetics, so let's stick to that one. The idea that, the rich can crank their babies' sliders up. Do you think there are policies that ought to be put in place to prevent this sort of growing inequality in the future? Or you don't claim to know what the answer is, or don't think there really is a problem, or
I think it can be a problem. I'm of two minds about it, because I am a proponent of liberty, and I do think it's an important thing to protect, but not total liberty, as we talked about in one of our other podcasts. But so there's this whole idea of, and even those left of center would say a lot about reproductive freedom.
Sure.
It's motivating a lot of the pro-choice animus, and so it could end up kind of biting them in the butt later when you want to maybe restrict that reproductive freedom over here. Like, oh, we're not going to let you do that to your baby because you're going to give them like totally unfair advantages.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, even now that you've brought up that AI thing,
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost a more immediate like the cognitive power that someone could get with Neuralink
Yeah.
far outstrips, I think, like just having a baby with 20% more muscle
Muscle mass or
definition,
something,
muscle
yeah.
mass than
Yeah.
the average, you know.
Yeah.
That can really get away from us more quickly than
Yeah.
just having freaky, strong, tall, smart kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would wonder, we'd have to totally rethink reproductive rights and freedoms. I think we'd have to have a really honest conversation about what counts as a disorder
Yeah.
and
Right.
making paths available to correct those and not do what's sometimes referred to as designer babies. So actually, no, we're not going to do blue, or change the eye color or change the hair color. We're going to make that illegal. But we are going to not mandate, but maybe I could see someone arguing for mandate.
Yeah.
We are going to make paths available to like remove Huntington's disease.
Yeah.
Like we're going to zap that, and now babies don't have Huntington's disease.
Yeah.
Now you get into problems with, there are whole communities, there's a deafness movement
Yeah. Right.
where deaf parents want their kids to be deaf also.
Are they saying it's not a disability, or it's not a?
Yeah,
Maybe
well,
they wouldn't like that word, or
They don't,
it's not. My child's not somehow lesser than because he can't hear.
right.
Right.
And I think that's a bit of a confused
Yeah.
outcry because I'm not, well, as a Jesus follower or something, or a religious person who happens to think there's an image of God.
Yeah.
I think that you possess that in virtue of having a soul,
Right.
a free will, consciousness. So no one's lesser than anyone.
Right.
But you do have less access to the full range of human experience without being able to hear.
And that's objective.
And that's lamentable.
Yeah.
And I don't want that for anyone. Mm-hmm. So, but we would have to have a really honest cultural conversation about what counts as that.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if we're going too long now, but I'm having fun with it.
No,
so
we're good.
There's that recent show on Netflix, Life on the Spectrum.
Yeah. Right.
And really moving,
Love on the spectrum.
Love on the Spectrum.
Love on the spectrum.
They have lives
They have
too.
lives too. Yeah.
that they
It's a
live.
snapshot of their lives on the spectrum.
And that
Great
was a really
show.
moving, heartwarming show. And here again, the notion of disability comes up. Is autism a disability?
Right.
Is Down syndrome a disability? Are these things you would want to target in a genetic code to remove? Well, I don't know. I don't feel prepared to answer that right away,
Right.
because obviously from that viewing of that program, and of course those of us who know individuals like that in our lives, like we love those people.
Well, it's hard to imagine what their personality would be like if they weren't where they are on the spectrum. It's like that's sort of everything from their mannerisms to the way that they speak, the kind of jokes that they make. That is all influenced by where they are on the spectrum. So to change that would be like changing who they are in some way, or changing their personality in some way, and that does seem troubling to me.
Yeah.
You know.
And I mean, it's just gonna. I'm gonna make a prediction. This
for it.
will happen in our lifetime in the next 20 to 30 years. This will be the talk of the town. Everyone will be talking about this. I mean, I can imagine there are some people that are so obsessed with the skin color issue
Yeah.
that like anyone who's white is racist, and you might be of the persuasion that we shouldn't create more white people.
Right.
It's gone down the tubes.
Yeah.
That color has been ruined. You guys abused the power of it. Let's not have any more white people.
get rid of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so future baby, if that's probably a little bit more far away to change the pigmentation. But again, in our thought, I think we're still in the lab.
We're still in the lab.
You could change that color palette to be whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, different ideologies and ideas could have really drastic implications on this topic of what counts as something that ought to be removed or that we allow to be altered. It can't just be like this Las Vegas freewheeling anything goes arena, right? Where that seems so bizarre to me. And you can make the examples more wild.
Yeah.
And maybe not so wild. I think, boy, what's an example? If I can find it really quick. I feel like they have done genetic alterations of species where you can grab little traits from one animal and put it into another. So, for instance, I'm going to butcher the details, but there's this protein in fireflies called luciferin. Lucifer, angel of light.
Lightbringer.
It's what makes their butt light up at the night.
Yeah.
They were able to isolate the genetic code for luciferin, and I forget where they put it, like in a frog or something.
Wow.
And now frog lights up.
Glowing frog.
It's like, oh my gosh. So you can imagine then, again, in our thought experiment, and maybe not so far-fetched, I can have a light up baby.
Yeah.
Or if I was able to harness the turtle shell gene.
Yeah.
And now I have
They have a big built-in defense
and
mechanism.
I'm a military family, and it turns out having a turtle shelled kind of back helps you in combat. And so I can
just picturing a Blastoise kind of guy.
a ninja turtle.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of wacky, but I think the point is that if it was this freewheeling arena where you could just design a creature,
Yeah. Gosh.
then do we really just want to leave that up to any old person? And you've really changed the human experience at that point. It presses on what it means to be human,
What it means
of course.
to be human, yeah. It's scary either way, even if you leave it in the hands of policymakers to police to allow or disallow certain modifications. Somebody somewhere is deciding these kinds of human births are acceptable and these aren't.
Which is why
That's scary regardless.
and in the midst of this political weird season where elections are being questioned, that's why it's so nice to have faith and trust, confidence in your democracy, because then at least I have the feeling like, and
You have some voice.
hopefully the reality that these are genuine people that the majority of us through
Yeah.
the general population or electoral college, whatever ends up persisting, that most of us wanted that person and they represent us in some way and will make our beliefs manifest in reality. But yeah, it's really scary if it's just this cabal
Some
of
shadow
underground
council.
unelected officials. You know,
Yeah.
shadow council.
Yeah. Boy.
So that, I don't know if that's tiptoeing toward conspiracy theory, but
Yeah, it's a pretty dystopian future we just painted, but
I think these are the sorts of things
coming.
that can happen without thought and intervention. I mean, sorry to be long-winded, but
no, please.
there's an example of history. Like there's this term eugenics.
Yeah.
Maybe probably should have brought that up earlier. Good genes. That term has been so laden with negativity ever since the Nazi regime, maybe a little bit before and after, of people trying to create the perfect human and
Yeah.
altering genetics and including racial aspects into the category of not best.
Yeah,
So
right.
like Jewishness.
Right.
We would like to get rid of that.
Let's see if we can do without that. Yeah.
So this is something that's not that has happened in our recent history.
Yeah.
Of scientists of an underground shadow council
Yeah.
constructing their ideas and ideology and making that happen and enacting policies to achieve a eugenical outcome.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, maybe just to bring it back for something more manageable as a takeaway, before we get to all those crazy outcomes of Ninja Turtle babies, there's the more proximate concern of like, well, what if we do know that I can adjust this gene to ensure that people just get full nights of sleep. Like some people just struggle with sleep in their life, and I can make it so that you get a full 8-hour rest, and that's going to cost $25,000 to do that procedure. Wow, I mean, that's a lot of money. Not a lot of people can afford that. That's a leg up in life to just have a good night's sleep every night.
Wake up. Imagine waking up refreshed every day.
Even just one thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
There's a lot of traits that are probably like that just give you a good life.
Yeah.
So
Quality of life stuff.
to what degree do we make that available to everyone? Who's going to pay for it is the classic conservative answer.
Yep.
Do we just give these away? Well, we have to pay for it somehow. Someone's time is being spent manipulating that code, and he needs to make money for his family. So money comes from somewhere, and it's just a huge headache.
Yeah.
But worth thinking about ahead of time, at least the philosophy of it. Are these things that we want to be allowed to be manipulated?
Yeah. That's good, man.
Yeah.
So we don't claim to have the answers. We almost never claim to have answers.
No.
But we like to ask questions.
And provide a little bit of a framework, a structure, and some additional questions you may not have thought of.
Yeah, exactly.
To elucidate the issues even further.
Yeah. So if you've got thoughts on this, feel free to leave a comment on this video or write into the show. You can reach us at opentotruth.com, or you can email us directly, opentotruthpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We don't want this to just be a conversation between us. We want you to join the conversation too. So let us know what you think, what your concerns are. Would you make a Ninja Turtle baby? Probably not. It'd be pretty weird. But yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Awesome. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Stay curious.